So we need events for every single button we press in this game. Whether it's from a controller or from a keyboard, every time we do something, that's going to fire an event. We won't need the event begin overlap or the event tick just yet. So we're going to select both of them by dragging over a selection box, and we're going to delete them. If we ever needed to retrieve an event that we've gotten rid of, we can right click on the blueprint graph and type in the name, begin overlap. And there's our event actor begin overlap. So now that we know that our character is getting its event begin play script, we're going to delete that. So there are two ways that you could do action events, which are events controlled by us, the player. The first is the least popular. You could right click and look for an event tied to whenever your button is pressed. For example, if I looked for the A button and typed in keyboard afterwards, this event here will be triggered every time we press A. Let's right click, get a print string, plug in that print string. We're going to change what the print string says, and we're going to change its time to 5 seconds. Now we're going to hit compile and save. Go back over to the level. We're going to hit play, remembering to click on our level so that our mouse disappears. So now that we are in control of the game, we are not just spectating it. Now when I hit A should appear on the print string. Every time I hit this button, that event is firing. And this is how we're going to control our player. However, if we're going to design a multi-platform game, or even if you've already made up your mind that this is a single platform game with no gamepad support whatsoever, the way we're going to create those events is still the same. Instead of creating an individual event for every key, we're going to create an event which we can bind multiple keys to, so that if your game has, say, multiple buttons to access a menu, or there are multiple ways to control your character, you can control that. This is extremely important for gamepad support and multi-platform support. Let's get rid of this script and our event begin play, because we don't need that. Even though we're getting rid of things, we still need to compile and save. Go back over to your level, close your base character if you feel so inclined, and now we're going to go back to the settings pane and go to project settings. I'm going to drag this over here so that we get a full screen view. Project settings aren't something we're going to tinker with very much. In fact, in my experience, I've only ever tinkered with project settings in game development, specifically just to create input. There's a lot of stuff to play with here, but we're off to the input category. Click on input and you'll see here an action mapping and an axis mappings. This is where we're going to be putting in the buttons and keystrokes, our mouse movements and joystick movements to control our character. And not just this character, these are applicable for any character. If you control multiple characters in your game, anything you put in here will be able to be used. For example, if your character had a drone, you could put in those commands to control that drone in here. But that's much later. To get started, hit the plus button and hit the drop down menu. And here's our new action mapping. Action mappings are specifically buttons. We're going to get onto mouse movement, how we can look and move later on. We're going to start with a jump command. Click on this text field and type in jump. Hitting enter opens up this window here. This is where we define how we're going to jump in our game. I'm going to start with the PC button, which in my case, and most likely in your case, will be space. But you can pick anything you want, really. Spacebar is the one. Now obviously we're going to include gamepad support, so I'm going to click this plus icon again right next to jump. And that's going to give me the option for another command. Click the drop down menu. We don't have to put different buttons for PlayStation or Xbox. Instead, buttons are defined on a gamepad in Unreal Engine by their location. So I'm going to start by typing in gamepad. So I'm specifying what I want. You can see here the options that are given to us. D-pad up, down, left, right is self-explanatory. But if we scroll down here, we have our special left and our special right. They refer to the start and back buttons, or the option and share buttons, depending on what you're playing. Face button bottom would refer to X on PlayStation or A on Xbox. Face button right would refer to B on Xbox or circle on PlayStation. Face button left refers to X on Xbox or square on PlayStation. And face button top refers to Y on Xbox or triangle on PlayStation. We're going to start with jumping, and that is going to be face button bottom. You can change these to anything you like. Next, I'm going to add another command. This is going to be called crouch. Notice I hit the plus symbol here instead of next to the jump command. This gives us a new action, and this gives us a new button to fire said action. I'm going to type in crouch. My buttons are going to be left control, which is defined by CTRL. Control won't come up with anything. And my preference for a gamepad is the face button right. We're going to start with these two just for now, because I'm going to show you the results of our labor before we go and program the rest. Going back over to test and double clicking on our base character will present us with that blank screen. Now when we right click and type in that command, being jump, we now get an action event called jump. And just like that, we can program our jumping script. The same goes for crouch, action events specifically, and crouch. So now that I've shown you how we're going to program this in future, I'm going to set up the rest of the buttons. So now we're going to punch in our axis mappings. Click on the plus sign next to axis mappings, and we're going to call this first one move forward. Then if you don't already have a node here ready to go, click on this plus sign. I'm going to click on it because we're going to need another one anyway. And the first button we're going to command to move forward is W. We're going to select W from this list. And now here you might think that we're going to do one for backwards as well, but that's not going to be a separate axis mapping. That is in fact going to be the same one. To start with, we're going to click on this drop-down menu and press S. Then we're going to scroll down and find S. Now here is where the difference comes. If a scale of 1 will put us forward, then a scale of -1 will put us backward. And that's why we don't need to have different events for them. Just to show you an example of this, we're going to go back to our base character. I'm going to right click and type in move forward. There's our axis events. And you can see here, I have an axis value. This is going to determine whether we're going forward or backward based on the scale value we put here in our project settings. So this is why we don't need to put a separate event in for moving backwards. Moving back over to our project settings. Next, we'll add our gamepad support. This will be a gamepad left thumbstick, Y-axis. And because the thumbstick controls its own scale based on which direction you're drawing it, we don't need to touch the scale here. Next, we're going to add another axis mapping by going up to axis mappings and clicking the plus sign. We don't want to accidentally click here. And we're going to call this one move right. And just like our move forward, we only need to define one axis with 2 buttons. So we're going to click the drop down, hit the D key, and scroll down until you see D. And then we're going to click on another button, type in A, scroll down until you see A. And finally, we're going to add our gamepad. Gamepad left, thumbstick, X-axis. Don't forget to put the negative sign in front of your A for scale. Otherwise, both buttons will just take you right. So to review that quickly, W is going to be forward, S is going to be backwards, defined by the negative value in scale. D will be right, and A will be left, defined by the negative value in the scale. Our thumbsticks will sort themselves out because they attribute their value to which way they're pulled. Now we'll add our axis mappings for moving our camera. We're going to add a new axis mapping and call it look up. And this will be done with our mouse Y. And then we're going to add one for our gamepad. And this one is going to be our right thumbstick Y-axis. Disclaimer, we're going to come back and change our gamepad for camera, but I want to show you why we're changing it. Next up, we'll add another axis mapping. This one for look right. We will use the mouse X value, and we will use our gamepad right thumbstick X value. Again, we will be changing this as well, but just these two values, and it will be a quick change. I'm not going to make you do a bunch of work only to undo it just so I can teach you a lesson.